My name is Marissa Vale, 34 years old. I remember the day at Vale's family dinner, my dad Thomas looked straight at me and said, "You are the most useless child in this house." My mom Eleanor smirked. My sister Camilla laughed under her breath. Julian didn't even glance up from his phone. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just smiled, slow, deliberate, and walked out into the hot Phoenix night. At 7 a.m. the next morning, I woke to 42 missed calls from Mom and one message from Dad, just a single word, "Please." I typed back with steady hands, "Useless is busy." Before I dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And subscribe. This story only gets heavier. Growing up in Desert Ridge, Phoenix always felt like walking through a house where every spotlight was aimed just a few inches away from me. Our walls were lined with framed certificates, crystal awards, glossy photos of my brother Julian, shaking hands with his professors, and my sister Camilla standing in front of her debate trophies. My own achievements, little ribbons from school plays, thank you cards from charity events I'd organized, were stuffed into a drawer in my bedroom. They never made it to the hallway. When I was younger, I thought invisibility was something you could cure if you just worked harder. So I poured myself into being useful. I'd wake before dawn on Sundays, sneaking into the kitchen to make pancakes just the way Dad liked them, edges crisp, the center still soft. I'd set them on the table with a little sticky note, "For you, Dad." By the time he came downstairs, the pancakes would be cold. He'd brush past them, never asking who had made them, never noticing my ink-smudged handwriting. Mom's love was conditional, always dressed in comparison. "That's cute, Marissa," she'd say whenever I talked about planning fundraisers or school events, "but when will you get a real job?" Her eyes would drift back to Camilla, who was already preparing for law school. My sister knew how to bask in that gaze. She'd flip her hair, sip her coffee, and soak in the pride that I never seemed to earn. It wasn't just words. Money tied me down to them like invisible rope. By the time I was 26, I was already funneling $2,500 a month into my parents' mortgage because they were on the brink of foreclosure. When Dad needed heart surgery, I wired over $3,000 to cover the deductible, no questions asked. Camilla once called me whispering from a stairwell, desperate to finish her last semester of law school. I handed over $5,000, telling her she didn't need to pay me back. She never did. They accepted every dollar as though it were their birthright. Gratitude was optional. But my grandfather, Arthur, saw me. He had this steady way of speaking, like every word was measured for weight before he gave it away. On our Sunday phone calls, he'd say things like, "You're doing too much for them, kid. A family should be a circle, not a siphon." I'd laugh him off, insisting that helping them was what family was all about. He'd only sigh as if he knew I'd have to learn the truth the hard way. Still, despite everything, a fragile hope clung to me. By the time I was 34, I had climbed to senior project manager at a top event planning firm in Phoenix. My boss handed me a promotion letter with a grin telling me I'd been killing it. The raise pushed my savings into 6 figures. For the first time, I had proof, not just in emotions, but in numbers, that I had built something real. And then there was Ethan, a history teacher who laughed with his whole body and made silence feel safe. He proposed under a desert sky streaked with orange and copper, holding out a simple ring that felt more powerful than anything flashy. I said yes without hesitation. For once, I felt like my life was moving forward on my own terms. That summer, I decided to share both pieces of news, the promotion and the engagement, with my family. Foolishly, maybe I thought this time would be different. To prepare, I poured myself into something I hoped would soften the ground, a handmade family photo album. I pulled boxes of old photos from closets, scanning and printing them late into the night. Pages filled with snapshots, my parents' wedding, our backyard summers with sprinklers, birthday cakes with melting candles. I wrote captions in silver ink, added little stickers, pressed wildflower petals into the corners. Every page was my way of saying I still care. I still want to belong. The night of the dinner, I placed the gold-wrapped album carefully in my bag, my engagement ring glinting under the kitchen light as I zipped it shut. I told myself, this is the night. They'll have to see me. My chest tightened with a mix of dread and excitement. The Vale house on Desert Ridge Drive had never felt like home, but maybe this night could rewrite that. When I pulled into the driveway, I heard them before I saw them. Dad's booming voice carried through the open window, bragging about Julian's tech startup to a neighbor. Mom's laughter followed, laced with pride. Camilla chimed in with details about her latest real estate victory, her voice like polished glass. I gripped the steering wheel, staring at the front door. My news felt suddenly fragile like glassware, rattling in the trunk of a car. But I walked in anyway. The air smelled of roasted chicken and lemon polish, the familiar Vale family mix of presentation and performance. I stood there with the wrapped album in my hands, waiting for one of them to notice. Mom barely glanced up. "That's nice, Marissa. Just put it somewhere," she said, turning back to Camilla. My brother didn't look up from his phone. My sister smirked as if I'd walked into the wrong scene. I placed the album gently on the sideboard and swallowed the sting. Dinner hadn't even started, and already I felt 12 again, present but unseen. Still, I told myself, hold on, wait until the right moment. They'll have to listen. That night was supposed to be my chance. I didn't know yet it would become the beginning of the end. The clinking of silverware and the rise and fall of their voices felt like background music I had heard too many times before. Dad carved the chicken while Mom beamed at Camilla's story about a celebrity client. Julian, of course, scrolled his phone, nodding at nothing but his own reflection in the screen. I sat at the edge of the table, heart pounding with the words I had rehearsed, waiting for silence that never arrived. I tapped the ring hidden under the napkin in my lap, feeling its cool metal against my finger. I thought, this is it, just speak. My breath caught as I tried to step into their conversation. "Everyone, I have something to share," I said, forcing brightness into my tone. For a second, they actually looked up. All 3 pairs of eyes and Dad's half-raised fork aimed at me. My chest lifted with hope. I was promoted to senior project manager, and Ethan and I. The sound of metal slamming against porcelain cut me off. Dad's fork clattered like a gavel, silencing the court. His eyes narrowed, voice sharp as broken glass. "You are the most useless child in this house." Marissa, planning parties isn't a real career. Why can't you be more like Julian or Camilla? The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were new, but because of how practiced they sounded, like he'd been saving them for years. Mom's lips curved into that familiar smirk, her glass of wine trembling slightly with her amusement. Camilla laughed outright, flicking her hair back. Julian didn't even speak. His faint grin was enough. My throat burned. My body screamed to defend itself, to list every gala, every corporate contract, every night I stayed until sunrise, transforming chaos into something seamless. I could have reminded them of the mortgage payments, the tuition, the medical bills, all the ways I had carried them. But in that moment, it was as if my voice no longer belonged to me. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. I looked at each of them, memorizing the way their faces twisted with condescension. Then I smiled, slow, deliberate. The kind of smile that unsettles because it carries no anger, only finality. Their laughter faltered. Mom's smirk loosened. Even Dad blinked, unsettled by the silence that followed. I stood up the scrape of my chair across the tile, echoing through the dining room. I slid my purse over my shoulder, glanced once at the gold-wrapped album sitting untouched on the sideboard, and left it there. Some gifts are wasted in the wrong hands. Marissa. "Where are you going?" Dad's voice rose behind me, uncertain now. I didn't answer. The door clicked shut behind me, soft but irreversible. Outside, the desert night wrapped around me like a furnace. The air smelled of hot asphalt and faint creosote from watered shrubs. I walked to my car with steady steps, though my legs trembled. Sliding into the driver's seat, I let the silence settle. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to fix their mood, to soothe the storm. I was choosing myself. My phone lit up with the reflection of the dashboard lights. My hands hovered over the screen, then typed 3 words in the family group chat: "No more money." I added 2 more "good luck." Then I pressed send. The weight that lifted off me was almost physical, like dropping a suitcase I had carried too many miles. My fingers hovered again, tempted to explain, to remind them of the years I had been their safety net. But I stopped. They didn't deserve my explanations. I turned the phone face down, switched the ringer off, and stared through the windshield at the dark cul-de-sac. The Vale house stood behind me, glowing like a stage set, but the show was over. I gripped the wheel, the leather warm from the day's sun, and breathed. For once, I wasn't suffocating. The drive home was a blur of headlights and empty desert roads. Phoenix at night hums differently, gas stations glowing like lighthouses, cicadas buzzing in the background, the faint taste of dust sneaking through the air vents. I rolled down the window halfway, letting the hot wind slap against my face, grounding me in my decision. When I reached my apartment, Ethan was waiting with the porch light on. He opened the door before I even put the key, and worry etched across his face. "What happened?" he asked. I didn't give him the whole story. Just enough. "I'm done," I whispered. My voice shook, but not from fear, from relief. Inside, I set my purse on the counter, powered off my phone completely, and tossed it aside. Tomorrow could bring chaos, but tonight was mine. Ethan wrapped his arms around me, his warmth anchoring me to this new reality. I closed my eyes and thought of Arthur's words. A family should be a circle, not a siphon. For the first time, I understood. I had been the siphon source for too long. Tonight, I sealed it shut. The breaking point wasn't a scream or a fight or a dramatic collapse. It was a quiet click of a door, a simple text, and a decision that would unravel everything they thought they controlled. And as I lay awake later that night, the silence of my powered-off phone beside me, I realized something that made me smile in the dark. They were about to learn what life without me really looked like. Morning sunlight slipped through the blinds, slicing my bedroom into strips of gold and shadow. The first thing I noticed wasn't the warmth on my skin, it was the silence. My phone sat face down on the nightstand, dead by choice, like an animal I'd finally stopped feeding. For years, my mornings began with calls from Mom, reminding me of a small favor, or texts from Camilla, with Venmo requests she labeled as temporary. That morning, nothing buzzed. Nothing demanded. I poured myself coffee, black and bitter, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. The cursor blinked in the search bar, patient and unhurried. My heart beat faster than it should have for what I was about to do. It wasn't loud revenge. No courtroom showdown, no screaming match at the dinner table. Just keystrokes. Quiet ones. The first was the bank. I logged into the joint account where my monthly transfers had been feeding their mortgage like an IV drip. My eyes scanned the transaction history, $1,500 every month, stretching back years. Each payment a tiny lifeboat keeping the Vale house afloat. I scrolled until my throat tightened. There it was, a pattern of sacrifice. My sacrifice. I clicked Cancel Recurring Transfer. The confirmation window popped up. Are you sure I let myself breathe? Then hit yes. Next, the hospital portal. Dad's surgery had been last year, but I was still listed as the secondary guarantor on the account. I clicked through pages until I found the option Remove Responsible Party. Another confirmation. Another, are you sure? This time I whispered to myself, yes, I'm sure. I thought of the gold-wrapped album I'd left behind on the sideboard, a symbol of me still trying. And then I thought of that text I'd sent before turning off my phone, no more money. Good luck. It wasn't just a warning. It was a vow. One by one, I moved through the digital threads that tied me to them. The credit card I'd opened for Julian when his startup hit a rough patch. Closed. The emergency family line with my name as co-signer. Terminated. I scrolled through my folders and created a new one, Vale Ledger. Inside, I started dropping PDF statements, bank receipts, screenshots of transfers. Each file was labeled neatly with dates and notes. It wasn't for them, it was for me. Proof that my worth had always been written in numbers they refused to acknowledge. Ethan came in halfway through, still in his t-shirt and shorts, hair sticking up. He set a hand on my shoulder, warm and grounding. You're documenting. he asked gently. I nodded. If they try to twist the story, I want the truth in black and white. He kissed the top of my head. That's not petty. That's protection. I smiled faintly. He understood. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming control. After he left for work, I sat staring at the screen, the folder glowing back at me. The urge to cry rose like a tide, but the tears didn't come. Not yet. Instead, I reached for a notebook leather-bound, a gift from Grandpa Arthur last Christmas. The first page was still blank. I picked up a pen and started writing, mortgage $1,500 month, 4 years, $72,000. Cheryl's law school, $5,000. Dad's surgery, $3,000. Julian's loan, $2,500. The total startled me, $82,500. Nearly the cost of freedom if freedom had a price tag. I underlined the number twice. Then I wrote one sentence beneath it. This is where it ends. Arthur called me that afternoon. His voice was rough but steady like gravel under tires. Kid, he said, skipping the pleasantries. I saw your message. Good for you. I almost laughed. You don't think I was too harsh? He scoffed. You've been their oxygen tank for years. You just pulled the plug. Don't mistake survival for cruelty. I closed my eyes, leaning into his words like they were shade in the desert heat. They'll hate me for this. They already did, he said simply. Not in words, maybe, but in how they treated you. Now you're just refusing to hate yourself, too. When we hung up, I sat in silence for a long while. His voice echoed sharp and clean. Don't mistake survival for cruelty. That night, Ethan and I walked through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, the cicadas, buzzing like broken wires in the trees. Do you regret it? He asked. I shook my head. No, I regret waiting this long. My silent counterattack wasn't a single moment. It was 100 tiny decisions stacked together, closing accounts, ending transfers, keeping records. Every click of a mouse was a declaration, I am not your safety net. I am not your bank. I am not invisible. And yet, as freeing as it was, fear still lurked. Fear that they'd show up at my door, that they'd spin the story to the extended family, painting me as heartless. Fear that maybe, just maybe, without their approval, I'd crumble. But the truth. The silence around me was louder than their applause ever could have been. It told me I was finally in control. The house in Desert Ridge would feel the tremors soon enough. Bills would arrive. Mortgages would threaten. Julian's credit card would be declined. Camilla's calls to investors would fall flat. Mom's wine glass would tremble when the final notice slipped through their mail slot. They would learn. Not because I screamed it, but because I stopped whispering yes. And me, I was finally learning, too, that sometimes the most powerful fight is the one you wage in silence. The silence didn't last long. By the second morning, my phone lit up like a wildfire buzzing across the counter in angry bursts. I let it vibrate on the wood face down as if the black screen were a shield. 42 missed calls from Mom, 8 voicemails from Dad. Camilla sent a chain of texts, each one dripping with entitlement. You can't just cut us off like this. This is family. What about loyalty? Julian finally chimed in with a single line that made me laugh out loud. I thought we were partners. Partners. As if I'd ever signed up to bankroll his failing startup. I scrolled once, then pressed, Do Not Disturb. The silence returned sweeter this time. Still, I couldn't help imagining the scene unfolding back at Desert Ridge. I pictured Mom pacing the kitchen tiles in her silk robe, clutching a wine glass even though it wasn't noon. She would hiss at Dad, You need to fix this, Thomas. She can't just walk away. Dad, red-faced, would pound the counter, insisting he had everything under control, even as the foreclosure letters piled on the sideboard, the same sideboard where my gold-wrapped album still sat unopened. Camilla would slam her phone onto the dining table, ranting about her collapsing condo deal, her investors pulling back because she didn't have the upfront funds anymore. Julian would retreat to his room hunched over his laptop, calculating how many weeks of server bills he could cover without my money. The house would thrum with panic, the kind of panic only silence from me could cause. The smear campaign started soon after. A cousin messaged me on Facebook. "Your mom says you're going through a selfish phase. Is everything okay?" An aunt emailed me a sanctimonious note about how families should come before pride. It was clear they were spreading their version of the story before mine even had a chance to breathe. For once, I didn't defend myself. I didn't write long explanations or send evidence. Instead, I dropped a single screenshot into the family group chat, a bank statement showing 4 years of mortgage payments, the amount bold and undeniable. I added no caption, no explanation, just the cold, hard truth. Minutes later, Mom replied, "That's not the point." I turned my phone off again. Arthur called that evening, his voice steady but edged with fire. "They're tearing each other apart," he said. "I spoke to your father this morning. He tried to spin it, said you abandoned them. I told him flat out he abandoned you first. I don't think he had an answer for that." Hearing his words, I felt a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction. Sadness for the family I kept trying to save. Satisfaction that the truth was finally undeniable. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed how tense I was, shoulders knotted, even as I folded laundry. "They're not used to boundaries," he said, handing me a warm towel. "They'll push harder before they back off." He was right. The next day, Dad left me a voicemail that began with shouting, "You're destroying this family," and ended in a choked whisper, "We need you, Marissa." The contrast almost broke me. Almost. But I remembered every time they called me useless, every smirk, every time my name wasn't in the hallway of framed photos. I pressed delete. At work, I found myself more focused than ever. Planning a corporate gala for 3,000 guests felt easier than sorting through the wreckage of the Vale household. My assistant asked if something was different about me. "You seem lighter," she said. I smiled. Maybe I was. Back at Desert Ridge, their fragile unity cracked wide open. Camilla accused Dad of driving me away with his cruelty. Julian snapped at Camilla, saying she'd leeched off me too. Mom tried to play mediator, but dissolved into tears when the foreclosure notice finally arrived, stamped in red. Dad stormed out, slamming the door so hard the chandelier rattled. Arthur told me later it was the loudest fight he'd ever heard echo through that house. About time they faced themselves without you as the glue, he said. I didn't gloat. I didn't rejoice. I simply folded another document into my growing Vale ledger folder, another piece of evidence for myself. Every boundary I set became another layer of armor. But I could feel the war wasn't over. Their chaos had only just begun, and they weren't going to accept their downfall quietly. They would reach for me again, pull, twist, scream. This was no longer about money. It was about power. And for the first time, the power wasn't in their hands anymore. The wedding day arrived with the desert sun pouring molten gold across Scottsdale. Our backyard had been transformed with string lights draped from mesquite trees and rows of white chairs pressed into the grass. The scent of wildflowers and eucalyptus hung in the air, carried by the faint evening breeze. I smoothed my dress, a simple gown flowing and light, chosen not to impress my family, but to honor myself. Only one relative sat in the front row, Arthur. His posture stooped, his hands trembling, but his eyes locked on me with pride so sharp it almost undid me. Everyone else, the ones who had feasted on my sacrifices, who had laughed when I spoke, were not invited. Their names weren't on the guest list. Their absence felt heavier than their presence ever had. As the ceremony began, Ethan took my hands. His voice, soft and steady, cut through every old echo of ridicule. "Marissa Vale," he said, "you are everything." My heart caught, not because of surprise, but because of certainty. For once, love didn't feel like a transaction. It felt like home. But the peace didn't last. Halfway through the vows, a shadow crossed the edge of the yard. The gate creaked, and there she was, Eleanor, my mother. Heels sinking into the grass, her expression taut with a smile meant for cameras, not for me. Gasps rippled through the guests. She carried the gold-wrapped photo album in her hands, the one I had left on the sideboard weeks ago. "Marissa," she called out, her voice, syrupy, trembling at the edges. "I came to bring you this, a reminder of family." Every muscle in me stiffened. Ethan's grip tightened, ready to shield me if I faltered. Arthur slowly rose from his chair, his cane thudding against the ground. His voice raspy but resolute carried across the yard. "Not today, Eleanor. This day isn't yours." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's painted smile wavered, her mask slipping as she looked from me to Arthur. For once, she was the outsider. She clutched the album tighter, but the weight of it seemed to drag her hands down. Finally, she placed it on an empty chair near the back and walked out the same way she had come, her perfume lingering like a ghost. The ceremony resumed, though my pulse raced. When it ended, Arthur motioned me over. He handed me a sealed envelope, its paper thick and heavy, his name written in careful cursive on the front. "I didn't want to burden you," before he said, his voice breaking, "but it's time." Later that night, after the last guest had gone and the light swayed gently in the breeze, I opened it. Inside was a letter written in Arthur's steady hand, "Marissa. I've watched you give more than anyone ever asked for, and I've watched them give you nothing in return. You have carried this family for too long. My estate, modest as it is, will be left to you alone, not as repayment, but as recognition. You are the one who understands value. Promise me you'll use it to keep building the life they tried to take from you. You are my legacy, kid, not their cruelty." My eyes blurred, but I read it twice, letting each word sink into the cracks their dismissal had carved in me. The echo of my father's voice, useless, faded, replaced by Arthur's steady declaration, "You are my legacy." I folded the letter carefully and slid it inside the front pocket of the album my mother had dropped off. The same album they had ignored now held Arthur's truth like a hidden spine. For once, family history wasn't written in their laughter or their insults. It was written in ink that recognized me. That night, as Ethan and I danced under the stars, I realized something. The confrontation I had feared wasn't about shouting them down or proving my worth in their eyes. It was about refusing to let their absence define me and letting the echo of Arthur's words guide me instead. The Vales might still sneer in their crumbling house in Desert Ridge. They might curse my name while foreclosure notices piled at their door. But the final word didn't belong to them. It belonged to Arthur. It belonged to me. And it was simple. You were never useless. You were the foundation. Weeks slipped into months, and the Vale house in Desert Ridge became nothing more than a point on a map I didn't need to visit. News trickled through mutual acquaintances, foreclosure papers nailed to the door, Camilla losing clients when her reputation cracked, Julian exhausted from working double shifts to keep his startup from drowning. My parents had downsized to a cramped apartment on the edge of Phoenix, a place with no chandelier to rattle when they fought. I didn't gloat. I didn't even check the details. Their downfall wasn't my story anymore. My story was here in Scottsdale, where Ethan and I had moved into a modest 2-bedroom with sunlit windows and a backyard big enough for the dog we kept talking about adopting. I filled the shelves with books and the album my mother had once dismissed, except now, tucked inside its front pocket, rested Arthur's letter. The words, "You are my legacy," had become my anchor. Whenever doubt crept in on nights when old wounds whispered that maybe I had been too harsh, I'd open that envelope, let the ink steady me. At work, everything flourished. My new role as director of projects meant leading a team, mentoring younger planners, shaping events that drew thousands. The girl who used to tape extension cords under tables was now orchestrating entire citywide festivals. My name appeared in trade magazines, my email filled with clients eager for my vision. People saw me, trusted me, relied on me. It felt nothing like the hollow dependency my family had built on my back. This was respect earned and real. Arthur wrote less frequently as his hands grew weaker, but every letter carried the same refrain. "Keep going, kid. You've already proven yourself to the only people who matter, the ones who choose to see you." His words reminded me that family wasn't defined by blood, but by choice, by presence, by love, that doesn't demand sacrifice as proof. Sometimes late at night, I'd lie awake next to Ethan, the ceiling fan humming above, and let myself replay the past. The slammed forks, the smirks, the word useless tossed at me like an heirloom. But instead of pain, what I felt was distance, like watching an old movie that no longer stung. I had walked out of that dining room and into my life, and that choice rewrote everything. I stopped measuring myself against their yardsticks. My worth wasn't a tech contract or a condo sale. It was the laughter of friends at our wedding reception, the glow of lights I strung in my own backyard, the projects my team completed with pride. It was waking up next to a man who saw me completely without conditions. The last time I saw Arthur, months before he passed, he held my hand and said, "They'll keep spinning, Marissa. But you found your gravity." I didn't fully understand until after he was gone. Gravity wasn't about weight, it was about pull, about where I chose to root myself and what I refused to orbit anymore. When the funeral came, I wore black not for my parents' benefit, but for him. I didn't speak to the others. I carried his letter in my pocket like a shield. After the service, I stood alone at the graveside, the desert wind scattering dust across my shoes. "Thank you," I whispered, "for seeing me." Back at home, Ethan met me with open arms. We sat in the quiet, our future stretching ahead, plans for travel, for a family, for mornings not built on dread, but on coffee and shared sunlight. Sometimes I wonder if the Veils ever open that album, if they ever flip through the pages I spent nights crafting the captions, in silver ink, the pressed petals. Do they see what they missed? Do they realize the foundation they mocked was the one holding them up all along? Maybe, maybe not. But here's the truth I carry now. I don't need them to, because I know, and knowing is enough. The word useless has lost its sting. It echoes differently now, hollow and powerless against the life I've built. In its place, another echo rises, Arthur's voice warm and steady. "You are my legacy, and in that echo, I've found my home." If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or made to feel like you didn't matter in your own family, I hope my story reminded you that you're not alone. Walking away from toxic patterns isn't weakness, it's strength. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself, even when it hurts. I'd love to hear your story. What boundaries have you set?